Anyway, so I would maybe speak about 10, 15 minutes, give you one of the most important insight that a lot of futurists are do agree upon, okay, which is very important to stress. And then we'll just open it to Q&A as much as I can.
Great.
And that'll be much, I believe, relevant to whatever you're doing. Now, I understand that the most important issue that is of your concern is what's happening with China. Now, I assume that you are all very knowledgeable about what China is. I assume that you are very knowledgeable about the day-to-day, things that are constantly happening with regards to China. But I would like to give you a perspective that I hope I will be able to just, to add something to your knowledge. As far as we understand, at this point in history, we are witnessing probably a dictator that is going to shape at least the next half a century. His name is Xi Jinping. That's not a simple and an easy thing to say bluntly. A lot of people are still not aware that what we have seen with Putin, when we were speaking about Putin for many years already, that's we are witnessing a dictator that is going to shape the history of Europe in the third decade of the 21st century. Unfortunately, it's happening, and most of the decision makers in many places worldwide were surprised in ways that the way they speak now, that how much they were surprised is frightening to see how our leaders really don't have a clue about historical processes that are taking place, and their background is not something from recent years, but their background goes back centuries in the past. Now, we tend to think that whatever is going to happen its context is just a certain person, and that's not true. Okay, and the most interesting issue in history, from the perspective of future studies, is what if what's his name, Einstein, was not born? Should we discovered his ideas in a different way or not? What if the Nazis were not somehow didn't take over the democracy of Germany? Should we have Second World War or not? We believe that there are some driving forces in history, that it doesn't matter who's leading an epoch, a certain place, a certain party, or whatever. They are engulfed by those driving forces. And whether they like it or not, they will act in a certain way that can be predicted, not by 100% validity. We think that 70% validity, that's enough for all of us to understand trends that are developing. So what we see now is a phenomena that always happened in history. When there is an entity, okay, a group of people that for centuries was cruelly addressed and dealt with, in a matter of, it doesn't matter how long it will take. It might take sometime a century, it might take some, century and a half. They are so furious about what happened to them, they will react to what happened to them in a very furious way. That's China today. Now, if you go and study what the West did to China for the last 200-300 years, it's a tragedy. The way they treated Chinese people and the way they treated its economy and its resources, etc., etc. I would really urge you to go and study that past, that history, and you'll see that we are witnessing at the moment a person that its very personal agenda is to take China to its natural place in history, which is leading humanity. The East, generally speaking, led humanity for millennia. The West is leading humanity only in the last 500 years, less than that, 300 years, which is not a lot, if from the perspective that is really that high, that broad. So what we're witnessing here is a person. Thousands of years. The humanity, generally speaking, okay, we are called in science Homo sapiens. Okay, actually, we are a variation of Homo sapiens. We are Homo sapiens sapiens. Okay, generally speaking, Homo sapiens were born thousands of years. I'm not going to mess with evolution. Okay, with that issue. Okay, all right. We are Homo sapiens sapiens at best 10,000 years. Okay, now Homo sapiens sapiens were born in Africa, in East Africa, and emigrated for millennia, emigrated mostly to the East. The East now is the most dense place on Earth by populations. On average, there are about 1,000 people on each square kilometer in Asia. How many in the US? On each square kilometer, on average, don't speak about Manhattan. What do you think? 10,000. 40 people on each square kilometer.
40 versus
1,000. It's on average, okay? Here you can see different spots, but generally speaking, when you calculate a lot of things, a lot of economical things, you calculate by the average. That's not an issue, okay? So we really need to understand something unusual is in the. What is it?
That's people
joining.
We have
calling in, meaning they are joining.
Yeah, they're just listening. But
all right. So if I am to summarize the last 5,000 years, I would say the following. And unfortunately, I didn't think about bringing, my computer to show you a lot of things. I thought it would be a little bit more private and intimate. Intimacy, that's a hard word, okay, but not okay. So if you take a look from an iceberg, a bird's eye, from above, 5,000 years, you'll see something unusual in human history. You'll see a very interesting pendulum. For a century or 2 or 3 centuries, East takes over West. And then there is a reaction. West takes over East. Time after time after time after time. 5,000 years of human history summarized in one sentence. In that pendulum, people were treated very cruelly. They were killed. They were gassed, if you wish, from late history. New languages emerged. New ethnic groups emerged from that pendulum back and forth. The middle of the pendulum is Eurasia, which started a little bit higher than what we call today Russia. Ukraine goes a little bit to Turkey and Israel. We know that the transition times in history start always in that spot. Always. It's amazing to see it in history. So we are probably at the end of an era. Now, by saying an end of an era doesn't mean tomorrow. It might mean, a century, which is, let's not go and throw ourselves in the wind over here. Okay, I'm speaking from a very large perspective in order to be able to zoom in to the next year. Without having that very broad perspective, you cannot understand the present. If you wish, the whole discipline of future studies is not to try and understand what might happen 10, 20, 50 years from now. That's not the idea. Who we are to know what's going to happen in 5 minutes. We are not prophets. The whole idea of future studies is to try and see the present from the future. We were taught that in order to see the present, we need to go and take a look at it from the past. We say that that's not enough. Let's take a look to the present from the future too, in order to understand what's happening. Most of the time, we as a species really don't understand what's happening in the present. It takes years first to know what happened, and then to understand the meaning of what happened. So what we are trying to do is, in our exercise, intellectual exercise, we shoot ourselves into the future with a lot of methodologies in order to take a look at the present from the future and maybe see the present in a different light. That's the whole idea. So what we are seeing here is a person that made it its value, its purpose to bring back China into world stage as it should be. And he's doing it step by step. Actually, he took over in 2012. He entered the office at 2013. There is a custom in China that after 8 years at best, you give the helm to another person. He decided he's not going to do it, and he passed a law that he will remain the leader of China as far as he wants. Now, just think of the parallel of that person that is causing now a lot of troubles worldwide. People did not understand those steps. They didn't understand what driving that personality to do what he's doing. The most important thing, which is, I believe, you should take a very close look at it. China is a huge country. And for the last at least 50 years, 70 years since Mao Zedong took over, they developed a very unique process of decision making with some stages. At the higher tier of those stages, there were about 25 people, and the highest tier is 5 people, okay, that took decisions in a consensus. That was the idea. Only decisions that all agree upon are taken. Otherwise, that decision will not be taken. He eliminated that process in the last couple of years. He is the only decision maker now in China. And in the autumn, he's going to formally be the leader that no one will be able to challenge, as far as he wants. Now, this is the personal context. The national context is that China in general. But when I speak about China, I hope you understand there are two Chinas. There is the Communist Party, about 100 million people, and there is the Chinese, another 1.3, maybe even 1.4 billion people. Two different entities. Okay, I'm not speaking.
I want to tell them what's that. Whoever's on the phone and has noise in the background, if you could mute your phone. This you want to leave. Okay.
So something new is emerging in world geopolitics. There is a difference between Putin and Xi Jinping. Okay, China doesn't want to take over the world, doesn't want to invade other nations. China has a very interesting philosophy. Or the West, the philosophy of the West is that you manage the world by developing equilibrium, if you wish, between entities. That's the geopolitics of the West. The geopolitical paradigm of China is very different. They have an interesting idea that says that everything that is under the skies needs to have a center. The center is China. That center needs to take care of the harmony of the world, to balance things. Whoever will reject the role of that center is an enemy. So what they would like to do is not to take over countries. They would like to take over the control over everything that is happening worldwide in order to achieve balance. Everybody wants balance. Everybody wants peace. Everybody wants prosperity. Let's be very clear about it. The problem is that we really don't understand the outcome of our ideologies. It's like like communism. They didn't understand at the beginning. At the beginning, it was, as usual, Jews developed the ideas of communism. It was an amazing, set of values. But step by step, you see that those set of values are not real. They are not working in reality. Not just they are not working, they are bringing a lot of harm to a lot of people. The same thing with a lot of ideologies worldwide during history. So the main project that you have all heard about, that Xi Jinping is pushing very hard, is the new initiative of the Silk Road, which is called the Belt and Beltway, with an investment of $1 trillion, taking over all the routes of commerce worldwide. Not only that, he understood that what made the US the superpower of the 20th century is its ability to control the seas and decide who's having the right or the favorable, let's say, agreement for trade. He understands that the future is not who's the one that controls the seas, that the one that controls the flow of information. And that's why they are investing trillions of dollars. Nobody knows exactly how much, to develop the platform on which humanity will, move information in 21st century. What you are all familiar with is the 5G. But that's not the only thing. there is another project that I think you didn't hear about it, which is far more significant. That's the project of developing a very unique technology that is called UHV.
Called what?
UHV.
UHV.
That can transfer energy wirelessly. Their idea is to go to a lot of places worldwide to put, let's say, solar panels and beam that energy, let's say, to New York, to all over the world. So their idea is to take control of the routes in the seas, on land, around the pole, North Pole, okay? Take control of the platforms on which we are doing our day-to-day data sharing, and take control of the blood of civilization, which is energy. Now, never such a thing has happened in history. Never. With such a scope, with such a vision. It's frightening even to think about it. By the way, the West was asleep for at least 8 years. Only about 2-3 years ago, the West started awakening, covering the dots and connecting those dots to see that there is a very huge strategy behind everything they are doing. I'll tell you something that happened to me yesterday. A few days ago, I gave a lecture about China, and I put that lecture on my YouTube channel. If you can listen to Hebrew, go look for it. In a matter of 2 or 3 hours, somebody writes on my channel in Chinese, "Be careful, we're coming." The lecture was in Hebrew. 2-3 hours after I posted that lecture, somebody already probably translated what I've said in order to understand and reacted in Chinese. Thank God I understand a little bit Chinese. Don't worry, I'm just kidding. That was Google Translate. I think it's frightening to think about it. So let me sum up the following with the following. If we are to really understand the trend,
Mike, mute your phone.
Can you mute your phone, please?
There you go.
Who's that?
Video's cool though.
I would really urge you, first of all, go read a little bit about not the recent history of China. Go take a look at China, 300-400 years ago, what the Brits did to the Chinese. Opium, not just opium, everything. They sucked everything from China. They are furious. By the way, the other country that is really very furious about the West, you know who's that country? But the trends are a little bit more further in 21st century.
Yeah.
Iran.
No,
Russia.
you don't even think about it. When I'll say it, you'll say,
Australia.
wow, Japan.
Yes.
Mid 21st century, Japan will be the troubles of the world. Now, when you say it in 2022, people will say, what the heck are you talking about? When we said in 2020, in 2000, I remember, I said to a forum of people somewhere, I said, Russia is the trouble of the third decade. High brass people said, where are you coming from? I said, we better go learn history, better go the driving forces of history. How come Russia is going to act as it is acting now? What's driving that fear that everybody is a Nazi for Putin? Where is it coming from? Is it dumb? No, he's not. Something big is brewing inside that culture, that entity. They suffered a lot in World War II. You all know that the Nazis have signed an agreement with Russia that they will not attack Russia before World War II. And they attacked Russia. In order to stop that attack, the Russians have sent to death 22 million people in order to stop the Germans. 22 million people. The Russians are afraid in manners that cannot be explained. It's like we Jews, we are afraid. Kamim alenu lechalotenu. Every generation, it's part of our DNA. It's more than that. We know the Holocaust in our memory is something unusual. 6 million, they're speaking about 22 million people. Almost half of their population. Well, let me rest my case over here. And if you have anything, to ask, to stress, for me to clarify as much as I can.
Could you explain to them the concept of the seas and the ports and Israel's strategic value in the world and the Middle East, maybe the Abraham Accords?
Oh, that's another
It's a dimension that just even a small part.
Well, you see, the West has awakened, and the West, led by the US, of course, is devising new strategies to counterbalance that vector. One of them is the Abraham Accords. Most of the people think that those accords are just between the Arabs and Israel. That's not true. Okay, the US has invested a lot of money in order for those parties to feel good with themselves. One of the ideas is to actually build a choke point in the Middle East of that new Silk Road that will be coming from East to Europe. So a lot of things are happening, and you are all familiar of what happened yesterday with the foreign ministers of those nations that came to Israel, and they have established actually an annual forum. From now on, every year they will convene to understand strategy, which we didn't do until now. Openly, we did it always, behind the scene. Openly, with a lot of hugs and jokes, etc., which is very different. Those nations are now educating their masses to understand that the world has changed. That's part of the strategy. I think that's enough to mention it, unless you want me to stress something else. Seder? Yalla, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm assuming this was a little set up to talk about China. To address our question is, how does this impact the USA-China relations, the deterioration thereof, for commerce going forward, militarily, etc.?
We have experienced 30 years of world peace after the collapse of the USSR. In history, there are very few times that such a thing happens, that two great powers, one of them collapses, and what remains is just one great power that decides almost everything that happens worldwide in terms of world order. we just finished that such an epoch in history. There is no such a thing almost in history. Even in the Tanakh we say, "Vatishkot haaretz 40 shana." When 40 years there's no war, that's a miracle. We are now at a certain point in which world order that was defined after World War I by what we call the Sykes-Picot agreement, okay, has collapsed. It's not relevant anymore worldwide. It has collapsed already many years ago, okay? But the US remained the sole superpower for a while. And then China is getting steam, is recovering and devising new strategies and new investments, etc., etc. And Russia also wanted to be part of the new world order. We need a new world order. Without a new world order, we will not be able to do any trade worldwide. It will be the Middle Ages. We need new agreements of trade. We need, tribunals, a lot of institutes in order to be able to move one thing from one place to the other place with confidence. Hold on, let me finish a sentence. So, Russia wanted a place in the table. They said, well, we would like to have a triage of superpowers. Of course, he did a lot of mistakes, and Russia is going to go dormant at least a century in history. It will take it at least a century to recover as a superpower, because it's a superpower. Would like it or not, it's a superpower. And what drives, what defines superpowers is, of course, geography and resources, and they have everything. We are now at a certain time in history that transformation is going to be so fast, so radical, that anything we can imagine at this point probably will not be what we will see in reality. That's the definition of transition times in history. So I can go and estimate what will be, in a year from now, a couple years from now, but it will be just an estimate. It will be much easier for me to see what might happen a decade from now than a year from now. But just put into your mind that the next year, a couple years, we're going to see volatility in ways that we couldn't imagine. In trade, in geopolitics, in technologies, everything is shaken in their foundation. Go ahead.
So I have. Oh, sorry.
No, just do you see China invading Taiwan?
I don't think so. Not at this point. But if there will be a confrontation between the West, I mean a physical one, a real confrontation, they might take over, which is easy to do. That's not a big issue to do.
And how do you see the U.S. reacting?
Well, it depends on the context of the timing, because there is no treaty between the US and Taiwan. They are not part of NATO. So
US doesn't even recognize Taiwan.
Exactly. So what I have learned in history is, even though you have a treaty,
Relevant.
in the D-Day, people are hesitant to act upon that treaty. It happened in World War I, World War II, an amazing, a pattern. So if you don't have a treaty, how come the US will send its troops? So it depends on the context, at the timing in which they will act somehow. Go ahead.
Like removing Western bias, let's say, on China, and knowing China, the success of China over the last 30 years, the fact that, like you said, that they're mostly peaceful and they're looking for balance. would Chinese hegemony be such a bad thing for the world? Is that a bad thing, or would they be punitive, or is it something that would be good for the world?
That's the most important question that we all need to ask. Okay, is it bad or not?
Right, exactly.
I think that's gonna be better.
No, I'm saying
I think there's.
our assumption.
No, I'm not sure either. I'm not sure, because they're not going to invade. They're just going to take control
Fine.
step by
So-
step without any,
So our assumptions are that the Western philosophy is the best philosophy. We are biased. So with Chinese, their control, their kind of way that they use balance, and would that be such a terrible thing?
Okay. As I said, this is the most important question we need to answer. I'm going to try. Okay. I think that I'm going to be blunt again. All right. I think that we are going to see the collapse of democracies in this 21st century. Democracy as an ideology, as a system, a social, economic system, is not exactly without any bad things. Okay, we are going to see that either democracies are going to redefine themselves to a higher level of organization, which is very important to know that humanity can do those kind of things. For example, there are nations that are already doing a fifth reform in their political democratic system. The US also might do something which is really important in history and do a lot of reforms. That's one thing to remember.
Example?
Why do you say that?
An example?
What way?
I can give you
Republic. We're a
Why
republic.
do you say that?
Socialist.
why do I say what?
That democracy is gonna collapse in the next.
Okay, there are
First start by explaining that we're a republic, we're not,
We're supposed
not
to
a
be.
democracy,
It's supposed to be.
and what it means.
So
Okay,
less middle class is triggering this, less middle income?
No, that's not the issue. One of the reasons why communism has collapsed is because communism did not understand the information era, the information technologies. They didn't understand how it's going to change everything. Communism used to control the flow of information, the rate of information, the type of information that the masses will get. They didn't understand how a fax machine, a facsimile will bring the collapse of Russia. If you remember, that was facsimile machines that because of facsimile machines, people knew where are the tanks holding their posts in Moscow, and they stopped them with their hands, with facsimile. They stopped radio, everything. They could use only facsimile. They didn't understand the power of information technology. So within democracies, there are also some very serious flaws. The most important or the most serious one is what we call fake news. Okay, you cannot. It's so democratic. Information is so democratic, and it flows freely from everywhere to everywhere. You cannot even know what's real, what's not real now. Not just in the news, in science. The scientific establishment and institute have already collapsed. I'm having a hard time when I get a paper to read. I don't know if it's real or not, if somebody just was making it. And we have a lot of proofs of people that just made up, scientific papers. A serious issue. And not only that, there are also a lot of flaws in democracies. Now, maybe democracies will still hold, but one of the most important institute or paradigm of democracy is the opposite of communism is capitalism. Capitalism has a lot of flaws. So humanity is going to have to do a lot of tune-up in the future in order to sustain societies, especially in mega cities. By the way, just a few years ago, just a couple or 3 years ago, humanity reached a very important landmark in its history. For the first time in the history of humans, 50% of humanity are living in cities. 50%. There was no such a thing in history. By 2050, there will be about 70% of humanity in cities. It's something else. We are still trying to understand what does it mean. We know that, for example, this pandemic is because of urbanization. If there were no so huge cities, this pandemic probably would be, much more easy than we have all experienced. Go ahead.
Don't you think that fake news is actually more weaponized in a communist state or an oligarchy? You see what's going on in Russia now. Whereas I follow your point, but it's really, I think, more weaponized in those governments than it is in a democratic nation where we have the right to filter through fake news and come to a conclusion to have that spread. And I think that a democracy actually protects better.
Point. Let me answer it in a very simple way. In non-democratic countries, they all know that it's fake news. That's their basic assumption. The masses know the government does not, provide reality.
But in Russia, they believe.
No, don't think so. That's what the government would like to believe. But people know that whatever they have, it's not true. They know it. Okay? In democracies, we still believe that we know the truth, which is a great difference. And people, when they suddenly understand something or know something, it takes, it might take much more longer than the average to realize that they might have, manipulated that information. Great difference, as far as I can understand. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Strategic alliances should the U.S. be emphasizing in Asia in order to battle, in a way, China and China's role?
Well, they have.
One other thing I want to say.
Yeah.
You didn't mention that China and Japan both have aging populations that are a huge problem.
Yeah, of course. That's another problem. The problem of China is going to lose half of its population in the 21st century, from 1.4 to 700 million people in the next 80 years. That's a huge strain on industry and everything. And in a matter of only 20 to 25 years, they're going to have 45% of their population 65 years and older. That's a very old population. Japan is going to lose half of its population too, from 120 million something like to 60 million people. These are driving forces that force nations to be much more aggressive. Let's be clear about it. Russia is just an example of nowadays. Part of their campaign is to take kids, to take population to Russia, because they are losing population. So there are a lot of theories to this analysis. As far as I go, I was just trying to stress the main points.
Strategic alliance is the key to the U.S.'s future.
There is a new alliance that is forming. 6 nations have formed an alliance to build the 6G generation technology to bypass the 5G. Okay, technology exists, but it needs a lot of investment. They are building a strategic alliance, militarily also. If you've heard, Australia cancelled a nuclear submarine with France. That's part of things that are happening behind the scene. For the first time, the US is giving permission to Japan to build new weapons that was not, it was not part of the agreement after World War II. And it's frightening because if Japanese, those weapons, it's only a matter of time they will.
What kind of
And the Germans. And the
space-
Germans too.
The Germans too, and the Germans
German just
too.
started now, yeah.
Yeah, but the Germans started now because of Russia. But with Japan, they have already, received. You see that things are progressing in a way that they will gain.
Which are the countries of the future in Asia? Instead of this.
Oh, that's a good one. You want a list? Okay, I said you send me an email. I'll send you the exact list of those nations. Now we have 6 very important nations, and 2 more are going to join.
Could
Which
America,
of the 6? Which of the 6? Which of the 2 more? Is it all Indo-Pacific alliance?
Yes.
could
Do you see Indo-Pacific merging with the NATO alliance in any way?
Of course, that's the idea. The idea is to, first of all, stop the alliance that China is doing. China is already having 15 nations around its umbrella, or behind, in its umbrella.
Because we dropped out of our agreement?
Say it again.
Is that because we dropped out of the agreement, the I always forget the initials.
The trade agreement?
Trade agreement. Yes.
TTP, I always forget.
TTPS. That's right. That's right. You see, there are a lot of things are happening. Not all of us know how to connect the dots and see that there is a strategy behind it. People think, well, it's just another thing. Trump is doing this, Biden is doing this. Well, we're just reacting. There's no reaction here. There is a very clear thinking that step by step, you, of course, do what needs to be done. Hopefully, it will help. But this is only hopefully. Nobody knows how history might, turn out.
Do you think there's people that play chess games in each country, like in Washington, trying to figure out the other move and where?
do you see?
As was sleeping for a few
Do you see a way that America could thrive and be part of, like, let's say we're not so full of ourselves and we step back and we do what's in our best interest. Is there any way for us to thrive with China being dominant?
Yes, of course.
Or do we have to be top? I mean,
Let be very clear.
Practical.
Let's be very clear. Okay, we can thrive here and we can thrive there. Okay, the issue is not thriving. The issue is, are we going to be free? Are we going to be controlled? Are we going to be, treated with fear? And I don't have to tell you. You can. People in Russia are
Yeah, but that's
are
Russia.
living.
China is a more of a parental type of society where the decision is made like a father for his children, and the children don't question the father. It's not a question of not being free or being free. It's a Western thinking that we think we're free, but actually we're really not free.
Okay. Freedom, as we know it, okay, is just the first stage of a very long journey. This is not the ultimate freedom, but freedom as we know it now was developed by a group of philosophers about 400 years ago. Okay, the nation state, the sovereignty of the state, that's something that we are striving for already 400 years to achieve and to complete and to fine tune. It's not the end. Okay. The most important thing about freedom is that it unleashes creativity. Without it, you are not creative. It's only a matter of time until you collapse. That's how we understand things, how they evolve. Okay, I might, give you a story of mine. It really demonstrates the idea I was trying to explain. A few years ago, I was part of a very small group that I'm not going to mention places, that went to an Islamic state, very important. Okay, and we went to meet their prime minister. He didn't know I'm Jewish. He didn't know I'm Israeli. Okay, I think, right? And we had about 7 minutes with him. That's it. Okay, he wanted to meet us. Those 7 minutes, he spoke about something. I was shocked. Okay, it was a group from world affairs, etc. He was speaking about how come 6 million Jews were able to make fun of 1.5 billion people. How come? You all know what I'm speaking about. Muslims, no, Jews and Muslims.
By beating them
Beating them, technologically beating them, scientifically beating them, everything. Okay? So we asked the question and he answered. He didn't look for an answer. He answered. He said, I think we started going down in history because, Islam was an amazing culture. They developed mathematics, geometry, sciences, medicine. It's not a simple thing. He said, the moment our Qadis decided, took a Sharia, they wrote a Sharia that said that if Muslims need to pray 5 times a day. Okay? He said, when the Qadis decided that if a Muslim needs to go outside its city to trade, and he knows that he will not be able to pray 5 times, he's not allowed to go to trade. He said, that's where we started going down. That's what we call, confining people to place, thought, etc., etc. It might happen to everyone. We are what we are is because we are constantly in a move. Going here, going there, connecting, networking, sharing ideas, and constantly debating things.
Also, the Mohammedans made it against the law to study the philosophies, to study the mathematics.
That came later.
All the things.
Yeah, that came later. But he said the most important thing that we were thriving. When our leaders said we are not supposed to travel, that's the end of our
Radical.
Yeah. So this is part of the issue. I hope.
One of the questions I don't plan to be asked and then afterwards is Jaime's goal, Victor's goal was to not just translate the problems, but to translate the opportunities. If you had to pick what you think are the geographies or countries of the future, and then the industries of the future, where is that utopia, success, etc. going to be?
What a question. What a question. Anyway, I don't think,
They'll cut you in, don't worry.
Yeah. Well,
Back in.
first of all, let's be very clear. If I'll tell you that Malaysia is one of them, okay? It doesn't matter. You won't be able to do anything there. Because you're Jew and you're American. So we are part of a historical context. We need to take advantage of what we are able to take advantage, not what is, an option, an ultimate option. So we need to understand our constraints. And, we Israelis, we know it very well. I don't think you, as an Americans, you understand what I'm speaking about. I'm an Israeli. It doesn't matter who I am. They will treat me as an Israeli. My options are small. Worldwide, I can be the brightest of the brightest. It doesn't matter. I'm an Israeli
So give us the
and a
answer
Jew
both ways.
and a Moroccan and whatever. You want to add some more
Some of
things?
the folks that are Jewish here, and we're trying that out. Give it to us both ways. If you're Jewish and if you're not Jewish, where's the opportunities geographically for the future?
I think the Arab world. Okay, the Arab world has matured to accept again our culture as Jews, our way of thinking. And they already know that we are very cunning and they will always be afraid of us. So there is an opportunity, and the Muslim world, at least in the Middle East, is thriving for new ideas, for new connections, and the platform is being, at this very moment, being built by the US, by Israel, by the Gulf countries, etc. But it will continue.
And layer on the success of oil for their legacy fossil fuel income. It's an
Yeah,
incredible-
they understand that the window of opportunity of that oil brought them is closing bit by bit. It might take another 50 years, c'est tout. They know it. So I believe that we have the advantage. We as Jews, and specifically we as Sephardim, we understand here, we understand there, we understand how to speak, we understand how to, to hug and kill, both. So we are more of an, let's say, an Arab culture. We are Arabs, by the way, by all means. So we have a lot of advantages. And if you can connect the dots between the US, Israel, and UAE, and with some cunning, with some open heart, that's what we are. That's what they like. They don't like.
Outside of Malaysia, not Jewish, where is the other opportunity?
The non-Jew. Well, I think that Australia is the land of opportunities of the 21st century.
Till China takes.
I don't think China will take it. It's impossible to take Australia. It's like impossible to take the US. Now, if I am to go back to his question about the US, let's be very clear. The US empire is very unique in history. There was no such a thing in history as what we see now in the last couple of centuries. The geography, the topography, the culture of the US is very unique. It's almost impenetrable, impossible, impenetrable.
Even with Biden and Harris.
Impossible. This is something very unique. The only place that it will be invaded from is
Within this guy.
no,
People.
Mexico.
Yeah.
At the end,
Yes, that's
the
it.
South will take over at least part of the US in about a century from now. In any case, the US is the next superpower of the 21st century. Okay?
US?
The US. All right? Because of a lot of advantages that I don't have time here to elaborate on.
Give us just 3 advantages.
3 advantages? Well, first of all, of course, you have about here 330 million people. You have borders that can protect without investing a lot of resources. Okay, it's very hard to penetrate, to invade from afar, which most of the superpowers and empires in history were invaded from another superpower from afar. Okay, it's impossible to invade the US from afar. Okay, you need unusual ways to bring a lot of boots in order to take over this empire. this empire will collapse from within. We know it in history. Probably it will take another century, at least, you know what, another 150 years. And it will not collapsing means, not disappearing. But think about Italy as a Roman empire. That it will be the same thing here. Okay, for many more even millennia, but it will not be the superpower of the world. Superpowers and empires used to have about 500 years of life expectancy in history.
How long, sorry?
It used to be
We're
500
halfway,
years.
we're halfway.
Well, no. Nowadays, superpowers, the life expectancy is about 200 to 250 years. That's it. Everything is condensed.
We're 250 now.
No. Our superpower only at best a century. Okay, don't count from the establishment of the things. Go ahead.
Just spend a few minutes on the state of Israel.
What do you want me to say?
Okay.
Many years ago, you predicted great things for Israel. Obviously, you now your outlook.
Well, I think that the 21st century is the most important century in the history of the Jews. Much more important than the biblical times. In the biblical times, we had 7 civil wars. 7 civil, we killed each other until the destruction of the first temple, which really was a devastation. We are probably going to be, for the first time in history, not even in the biblical times, that the majority of Jews worldwide will reside in Israel. Okay, as far as we understand at this moment, we are now about 9 million people in Israel, out of them about 7 million Jews. In about 30 years, we're going to double that number. It will be probably 16, 17 million Jews, about 12 million Jews. Okay, and another 4, maybe even 5 million others. At the end of the 21st century, we're going to be 24 million people on that piece of land. Out of those 24 million, 20 million Jews. Never Israel was so populated in history. Even in the biblical times, the majority of Jews were not in Israel. They were always tribes were killing each other. Most of the people always left. They left to the north. And in our narrative, we say that we have lost 10 tribes. It's not exactly we have lost. They decided they don't want anymore to be part of that group, and a lot of people went to Egypt. A lot. Not the largest, but a very large Jewish community during the biblical times was in Egypt. Not only was in Egypt, they have built a temple in Egypt, a replica of the Temple of Jerusalem. They thought that's the center of Judaism, not Jerusalem. So in the 21st century, we're going to see the recovery of the Jewish people after at least 2,600 years. And of course, we're going to change everything. Judaism is going to be totally different than Judaism that you and me are familiar with now. From different kinds of halacha, different kinds of narrative, historical narratives. Everything is in transformation. Now we don't, we don't really always think that what kind of transformation? Well, we already 2,000 years like this. What's going to happen? What's going to change so much? A lot of things are going to change. Just think that 100 years ago, the majority of Jews were Orthodox. Majority of Jews. Okay, at the beginning of the 20th century, they were about 8 million Jews worldwide. beginning of the 20th century, before World War II, we reached 18 million Jews. Okay, which is an amazing thing that happened. But most of them were Orthodox. The very small groups of Reform and Conservative just started forming. Reform started forming, the Reform movement started forming in 1810. The Conservative movement started forming in 1890. Okay? Now we are exactly the opposite. There are about 5, at best 10% of world Jewry that are Orthodox. The majority of Jews are not Orthodox. It's a different Judaism. Now we think, as Orthodox, we think we are the center, we are the most important, as usual. We always thought that way. But in a century from now, it's going to be totally different than we see that. There won't be Orthodox people. They won't be Haredim. There won't be, modern Orthodox. These are just, movements in history. This is not permanent. There's no such a thing. So, if I am to sum up, Israel really is going to be a place that maybe a prophet somehow could have imagined.
So you said on Saturday Israel will be a superpower. Want to elaborate on that? You used that term.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not the one who's saying it. There is a very known study that studied the superpowers of the world now, and they have already put Israel as number 8, the 8th superpower of the world, which is not exactly yet a superpower, but of course a regional superpower. Okay, but the more we progress, the more the Middle East is totally collapsing. The Middle East is a
Trajectory.
No, it's a tragedy in history. Really, the people in the Middle East are devastated. The more, we progress in time, the more we all see it. And Israel is actually an island in the jungle. It's an oasis that is thriving, that is constantly getting new influx of human resources. Now, with a lot of challenges. I'm not saying there are no challenges. I'm the most frightening challenge is how do you build another 2 countries in a matter of 80 years? It took us 80 years to build one country. Now, with this, taking into account these trends, that means that by the end of the 21st century, there will be 24 million people. You need to build another 2 countries in that piece of land. And they need to be much more modern. They need to be much more, advanced and technologically and scientifically. It's a huge challenge. I'm afraid that the leaders don't understand what's ahead. I'm counting only on our agility, our ability to change very fast, understand what's happening and act. And I hope our children will be able to do it. Our generations did something unusual. Nobody thought that in a matter of 80 years we will be a regional superpower. Most of world Jewry in 1947 did not want that Ben Gurion will establish a Jewish state. And the reason? There is no way you will succeed. You are just going to bring another Holocaust. Most of the Jews worldwide were pretty sure that that project is not going to succeed. So, I can go and give, I just wrote a book about the future of Judaism. I hope if you want, just
English?
in English too.
You have a few, we'll sell them all.
And no, I don't have one.
Two more questions. One, you mentioned the word nuclear. You mentioned the word nuclear, and as I said to you when I saw you, two sayings always stand in my mind. One, that mankind has never created a weapon it didn't use. And then number two, what Einstein said, he says, I don't know what World War III will be like, but World War IV, I know will be fought with sticks and stones. Any thought in terms of the threat, Iran, North Korea, one more, Pakistan, India, et cetera,
Russia.
Russia, right?
Well, I believe that in the next very near future, most challenging issue that Israel needs to take care of is, of course, Iran.
What?
Iran.
And it's not going to be,
Gonna take care of them.
it's not going to be nice. And I hope that we'll come out of it much stronger than we are now. I know that Israel is preparing for the big thing. Okay, and this is something that I believe will give Israel another springboard towards being a superpower after. Okay, and Israel is preparing for it very clearly. I don't know if you are following. As much as I can speak about, just a couple months ago, there was a decision that somehow was publicized that Israel is taking the war into Iran. That's it. We are not in the defense anymore. And it's going to be ugly, for sure. But we are preparing, and the more you prepare, the more there is a chance that it will not happen. This is a very old, wisdom of the past that the US has forgotten. Europe has forgotten. Since they did not prepare, they did not invest, they did not put a lot of poured money into preparations for war, Putin was able to do whatever he wants, knowing they will not be able to react. It will take them time.
They can't afford it. I mean, it's a problem. It's the demise economically over 30, 40 years that they don't have the resources.
There's no such a thing. There's always resources. It depends how you divide those resources. And by the way, wars are the driving force of economic growth. We think, we tend to think to forget it. Anyway, did I answer a little bit your question? No?
You answered a lot.
All right.
And then companies of the future was that last question. Industries of the future for the young guys that are all around the room.
Like me, right?
Define future for me. It's very
It
important.
was 30 years.
Wait.
30 years.
20 years. 20. It's good for us, and it's good for them. It's good for us and it's good for them. They're all in
20 years.
20 still.
It's important, because
20 years.
It was 20.
Yeah, everything.
All is too late even for
Let's
them.
go, yalla.
Economies of the 21st century, the first half of the 21st century, okay, are economies of knowledge. Now, there is a definition what knowledge is. It's not information. It's not resources. It's something else. If I am to sum up the definition in one sentence, I would say that knowledge is the applications of information. Okay, I'll give you an example. We used to pay for how many minutes we spoke with our phones, isn't it?
Right.
That's information that is traveling, and we pay based on the use of that, the amount of information we have used. Now it's flat rate and it's almost nothing. Okay. We are paying, we are not aware of it now, to have, for example, an application that gives us something that is very local and nearby me. If I do, for example, a search in Google, I will not get the 1 million entries that they have. I will get just the million entries that are relevant to me at the location from which I'm now doing that search. That means giving me knowledge, not information. It has to be relevant to me as a person, relevant to my location, relevant to my age, relevant to my culture, relevant to my ethnicity, relevant to my everything, my biology, my society, my wife, my kids. The more it's relevant, it's knowledge, it's not information. So take it as a formula, okay, with which you analyze everything. Is it knowledge or information? Okay, now, even this building, it's knowledge. I can define for you that maybe you are not aware of, but what you're selling is knowledge, is not commodities or bricks or whatever. Okay, most of our products now are knowledge. It's not commodities, it's not resources, it's not things. Now, the more we add knowledge to a building, to a table, to whatever, the more we will be able to trade with it. People will be asking knowledge that is, put on a platform that is tangible. Doesn't matter. But they don't care about the tangibility or the tangible things that on which that knowledge is coming. So the more we can really invent knowledgeability of things, the more we'll be able to make a fortune from it. And now it's big. You have to give a lot of examples. You have to give some ideas.
In simplicity form today, would you say software?
No. Software, no.
Drives.
No, software is just a platform.
Artificial intelligence.
With artificial intelligence, you are able to draw from huge amounts of information knowledge. If that artificial intelligence cannot draw knowledge from that information, nothing.
The greatest example today is the iPhone, right? I mean,
No. If you want the greatest information is Waze. Okay. Think about Waze. It took them, if I'm not mistaken, $80 million to develop, and they sold it for how much? Do you know?
1 billion.
300.
1 billion.
$19 billion. $19 billion. We forgot. And that was 7 years ago, if I'm
It's
not
going
mistaken.
public now as its own company.
That's right.
Intelligence.
Okay, so what they're doing is they are, collecting information from a lot of resources, analyzing it, making it relevant to you where you are at the moment. So, that's it.
Who owns Waze?
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, guys, and Jaime, maybe, and maybe they could turn this into something as a go-forward item.
If I can be very specific, that's not the.
Arbit, anybody for Arbit? Anybody? Can you leave him in here? I'll do it very quick.
Yeah.
No.
Anyone turn off?
Andreas, turn it off.
Arbit,